It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Welcome, true believers. Superhero fans one and all, welcome to my State of the Dungeon address for the game of Mighty Protectors that took place on July 2nd, 2020. The game, of course, Mighty Protectors. The cast was in attendance with the exception of Muscles, whose character was really beat up, but the player was ill, so we had to do without Muscles. And at this point, the group had successfully gotten control of the Black Ops ship, had all of the bad guys prisoned on the ship, role reversal, fun, and they were preparing to go to Hong Kong. Or, well, at this point they really weren't sure what the resources were. They were able to make good time because the ship is very fast and capable of going even faster with its hydrofoils. But the hydrofoils would have used up their gas much quicker and they wouldn't have been able to make it all the way to Hong Kong if they were doing that the whole way. They had about an hour's worth of fuel for that. So instead they were just trying to take advantage of the fact that the ship is naturally radar resistant and has anti-detection measures. And they were hugging the coast of Asia along Mongolia to head south. The group had some conversations with a few of the prisoners, the gifted who they had freed, about they hadn't freed them in all cases. For instance, little Jimmy, the young boy from Montana who's such a delight, they put it back in the room because he's frankly some trouble to them. His invisible friends are unpredictable at best, and if he gets riled up, that might be ugly. So they put him back in the room. As far as the two girls who are running around with shadow powers, and they are still at large. The group doesn't have any real problem with them, and they keep to themselves, kind of staying away from these squares who are running around. As far as Tom's kind of been left to his own devices. Sven, the super smart Swedish lumberjack, is also been left to his own devices, which comes into play as they go. So the group basically talks to Warbridge, and he's like, I leave it to your decision. If you go to North Korea, I can get somebody who can get you back to Canada. It'll take a bit longer, stretch out my resources a bit more. I'd rather you can make it to Hong Kong, but that it does involve going over open ocean where you won't have a lot of cover and our enemies have advanced military vehicles. That might not be your best option. They're like, we've got chauffeur driving, we've got us as Overwatch. What could go wrong? Any rate, so they progress, and they decide they're going to cut around Japan and they're going to make a beeline for Hong Kong. They have on as their assets a limited use cloaking device that they can activate. The ship has a weak force field, basically to stop people from phasing through it. And the downsides are the ship is obviously illegal. It doesn't have any iconography on it. It doesn't have a flag. It does not have running lights. It is breaking the law in any number of ways because this was never designed to really be something that has to go into civilian territory. So they're coming to grips with the different disadvantages when all of a sudden they're attacked by a jet. And the jet comes along, and the first thing they realize that the jet is attacking them is it fires a missile, and they don't catch it, but the radar that chauffeur is hooked up to did pick it up, and he juked fast enough to not get the ship hit by the missile. So at this point, we have Sentinel and Psyghost up on the deck, providing overwatch, and that jet is firing missiles from a mile away. None of their powers go a mile away. So this is a bit of a problem. Eventually, though, Psyghost takes off and goes up on an intercept course. She's just a person, and the ship is, the plane is not quite reading her, and it's dark out. So she flies up and up and up. The jet is getting close enough to use its cannons when she fires off a blast, or power blast, at the ship. First one, I believe, missed. Her dice weren't exactly the most friendly that night. Several went into dice jail, I suspect. And so the first blast missed, and the pilot's like, holy crap! Something just attacked me! And it looked, and there's a person just flying. Well, she turns around, and she nails it. Very weakly. The damage dice weren't working for her either. The thing felt the bump, but that was enough to stop it from making a cannon run, where it was going to just let loose with its autocannons, and it banked and flew off. The pilot was completely unnerved by being attacked by a superhero. Rook was listening in, and the guy is just babbling. Could not come to grips with it, so he flew back to base. However, that was a positive contact with the group, so they needed to jet to get out of there, which they did. They continued heading south at a pretty rapid pace after the group got everything back together again. Everything, for the most part, went just fine. So they were continuing to trundle along, and they didn't have another conflict encounter as they were approaching Japan. And now the real problem came with the real-life maritime trade. There were boats coming in, boats leaving Japan. It's a pretty busy place. High density. And again, dawn is creeping up, so there is some light, and they're in a completely black ship. No lights, no iconography, no flag. This ship is not designed to blend in. What to do? Well, chauffeur did everything he could to veer out of the way. The group really didn't have a lot of means of dealing with any kind of camouflage. They're good at combat, and most of their other miscellaneous skills just aren't going to help them out a great deal in this scenario. So it was basically, we'll just hunker down. If we have to do something, we'll do it, but we're going to try to get through this with a minimum of contact. There was visual contact, it was unavoidable, but for the most part, the group is doing a fairly good job of staying away until this Swedish cruise liner comes along. And he's like, I can't get out of the sight of that. The group talks together and they decide, let's activate the cloaking device. Just call it. So they activate it. They only have about 10 minutes of time on it. So they activate it. All of a sudden, I love doing descriptions for superpowered gadgets because I believe that's really what makes superpowered gadgets so cool. And all along the perimeter of the bow of the ship, these laser lights came rising up and irised over the ship, and as it did that, it distorted and caused a rippling of light so that the ship wasn't visible anymore. And it created this in kind of an arcing effect. So all of a sudden, their ship, for everybody outside, vanished. Pretty cool stuff. It lasted for 1d10 minutes, which lasted for the 7 minutes that I rolled, which was enough time for them to get considerably farther away. Even though their wake was still visible, the ship doesn't leave a great deal of wake. It actually has wake baffling, so it was tricky. It would have been tricky to spot them. So they got away pretty much no problem. Heading off south, still heading to Hong Kong. About this time, the group was getting dissatisfied because chauffeur was like, yeah, we'll get there about 6.5 hours. I'm driving the whole way. And they're like, well, we need to get there faster. This isn't working for us. Sven comes out. He's like, in case we have another problem with those jets, I made this for you. He hands them a cylinder. Says, just hit that button if something comes up. I have more stuff to do. And he walked off. We're like, the hell is this? It's the cylinder, about this big around, with a larger cap to the top of it, and it all looks like high-tech stuff. Where he got this stuff from, no idea. He apparently can repurpose a lot of things. It's glowing from within by some kind of a blue glow. But at this point, they're like, hey Sven, we have an issue. We need to generate some speed on this ship. We want to go faster. And he's like, well, considering the structure of the ship, there's really not a lot that can be done. But what I can do is I could hook up a boost for it so it can go faster. I just limited by the supplies I have access to. And they're like, well, you know, anything you can do. He's like, well, Bulwark's like, can you make a nuclear engine for this thing? No, I can't make a nuclear engine for this thing. I don't have the nuclear or the materials. I can make an ion engine, though. An ion engine is standard technology. I can make one, put it to the back so that it emits under the water, propelling us. We could do that. Bear in mind, he has no training in any of this. It's purely a function of his massively expanded intelligence that he is picking up advanced techniques from sciences that Sven was never trained in any way. It's theoretical until he makes it. So, in other words, he can use his inventing points for stuff. So they're like, okay. He's like, realistically, I could do a lot more, but quite honestly, Tom might have some ideas. Tom is, of course, the guy who can just whip gadgets out of junk. And they're like, okay, well, we better go talk to Tom. So, Bulwark goes down, and he goes to Tom's cabin and knocks. And Tom's like, come on in, man. And he comes in, and Tom has turned his room into a jungle. Honest to God, huge jungle. There is a toucan on a perch on a tree. He's got a hammock strung up. He is drinking a pina colada out of a coconut shell. No idea where he got the pina colada mix, the coconut shell, the stuff for this stuff. No clue. But at this point, they don't question. They're like, Tom, we need a means for a power source. We're going to build an engine on this thing, but we need some sort of energy source. Now, what we want to do is we want to tap energy out of the gifted who is strapped down in the other chamber who is emitting massive amounts of radiation. I need to know what we can do about that. Tom's like, well, man, I could come up with something. So he gets his penguin. Yes, he has a little robotic penguin. Calls him over, the penguin flutters over, and he reconfigures him using his power. And he's by far rested enough that he's got his power back so he can do this. And he's like, this thing should store it, just put it within range of the guy shedding out the radiation and it'll suck it all up for you. Thanks! I've decided that Tom is not going to be Bob Ross. He is more Bob Dylan. Just because I feel like it. And, so Bulwark takes the penguin, puts up his force field, goes into the room with the glowing gifted. Now this person is strapped down to a table and has 3 IVs plugged in. One looks like some sort of nutrient IV, so that person doesn't starve to death. One is hydration, and that is actually pumped in from another room, so it's filtered water that isn't being recontaminated by the radiation. No idea if that's going to hurt them or if they can be, victimized by their own radiation. And the last one, he decides, is a knockout drug. Good stuff, too. This person's in La La Land, not in danger of coming out. Basically a medically induced coma, really. So he's like, okay, release the penguin! And sure enough, this little light on the side of the penguin goes bleep, 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 maxed out. The thing's draw was so great that the radiation actually lessened that was crackling off of his personal force field as the penguin was in action. He was impressed. So he took the penguin out and he's like, great, now I got a penguin full of radiation. On to go talk to Sven. The poor guy had wanted to rest for a while, but yeah. So he goes and he knocks on Sven's door, and Sven is wheeling out a dolly with some equipment on it. He goes right over to the edge of the boat. Sven has kind of a no-nonsense way about him. He doesn't ask for permission. He acknowledges people, and he is polite, but if he's got something to do, he just wants to do it.
Don't forget about the 3 jet fighters.
That's coming next.
Okay.
So he drops the the edge of the dolly over the side. The wheels lock in place. It goes choo 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 choo. Puts the mechanism on the back of the boat. He's like, I got the power source. So he figures out he's going to have to rig up a cage for this. So he goes back. Now this time they actually made their perception checks because trouble was coming yet again. This time it was serious. A pair of interceptor jets and a fighter bomber to take them out. Again, all black. Came flying in. This time the group saw it, and they're like, that's a problem. All right, well, this time he told us to use it, so we're going to hit the button. They hit the button. I don't remember who was brave enough to hit the button. Oh, that was Psyghost. Yeah, they debated it, and she's like, boop. Suddenly the little thing pops on end, spider-like legs come out to stabilize it. The top kind of bulged out section kind of retreats into the bottom, locks. Iris is open on the top, and a coruscating beam of blue energy shoots up into the sky, wreathed with crackling electricity. It flies up about a mile into the sky, and then splits off and forms a dome that the energy just kind of rises up and creates a netting that rises up to the nadir at the top of it. And for just a sec, it passes over the boat, no harm, and then it intensifies and shoots out at a very fast rate, which hits the jets that are incoming. Bad news for the jets, as it turns out. Completely shuts out the engines of one. One of the other ones, parts of it started exploding, one of the interceptors. And the third one just kind of started to nosedive, and the guy ejected from that. But before this happened, the bomber dropped something. Boom. That's not good. Now it is, at this point, morning. People can see. But the ocean's kind of dark, you know? So people are like, we got to find out where that thing is. So Psyghost flies around, and she's looking for it. Remember how I said the dice didn't love her very much? Yeah, that happened. So she's barely even seeing the boat at this point. But, fortunately, Sentinel lived up to his name, and he's like, there it is. What am I gonna do? Ready to his repulsor blast, it got in range, and he let loose. Oh, Lord. For all the bad luck that poor Sentinel had leading up to this point, the skies opened, and I swear at his shoulder I could see Lady Luck and Admiral Awesome. He rolled a 1, and it was glorious. And then he fired his blast, and he rolled nearly maximum damage. And even considering that his blast would have been dampened by going into the ocean, it smacked that torpedo so hard that it detonated, projecting the force away from the boat. The boat rocked a bit. As a matter of fact, I believe somebody got I think Rook got thrown off the side of the boat. Fortunately, at the time, Psyghost was off the ship, and everybody else was brave. Sentinel held on. I think Rook got ejected. They ended up having to fish him out of the water, which wasn't a big deal at this point, but they weathered it. They managed to, with their superpowers, hold off against a threat that could easily have destroyed the boat. So, yeah. Plus, they were kind of starting to get kind of high on Sven at this point. His gadget seemed to work pretty well. So eventually, Sven gets the rest of the engine. He puts 3 other of those dollies of equipment that turn into basically these engine overlays. One of them gets down and installs the Penguin. Now Sven got harnessed up and he installed the Penguin. Got out and whoosh, they took off. The boat is brilliantly fast and very energy efficient, does not change their how easy it is to detect them. And they're shooting off. One minor detail I forgot to mention is that at one point their Wi-Fi had been cut off. At this point, Wi-Fi isn't a problem generally for Rook. He can pick it up, but only as far as the signals broadcast. He can sense where signals are, but he can't actually pick up the signal unless he's within range of the towers. So Sven fixed their router so that it could actually pirate from nearby channels and boost the range. So he was actually picking up from Chinese government backdoor Wi-Fi for part of it, and then as they were going by the Philippines, he was picking off of, again, various government agencies that had stronger Wi-Fi. So after these encounters, and most of the night, they finally got within sight of Hong Kong. And they all felt pretty good about that. It was a harrowing enough trip. But here it is about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They call up Warbridge. They're like, okay, we're at Hong Kong. He's like, wow, you made great time. They're like, we know, we're awesome. Actually, no, it was only 11 o'clock in the morning. And they're like, we've modified this ship. We really kind of want to keep it. It's a really good ship. And Warbridge is like, it's going to create problems, but... And they're like, come on, do it for the Penguin. And he's like, well, all right. I can go through some measures to use my resources to acquire the ship through as low profile as possible. But we will have to do something about your guests, because they still had 40 crew members and guards, not to mention the large, angry fellow in a friendly fashion named Psycho, and the, well, quite honestly, the somewhat scary Ravage, special agent. And they're like, okay, we gotta figure out what to do with these guys. Warbridge is like, okay, I can have somebody take them off your hands. As long as you're okay with that, that problem, I make that problem go away. Call in a few favors, shouldn't be a problem. Okay. This was actually in the form of 3 replica Chinese junks, the wide-bowed Chinese craft, crewed by reenactors, who, as it turns out, were smugglers who worked with Warbridge. So they took them off of their hands. They all had surrendered, and these guys had submachine guns. They're like, okay, welcome to our ship. And that's the last they saw of those crew. Ravage, they're like, he's too dangerous. They put him in the restraints that could hold Psycho, and might even have been able to restrain muscles if they were put on right. So they're like, okay, what are we going to do? Because he's got those blades, he could cut through his bonds. He's too dangerous to just hand over to normal people. So they tranked him to the gills with the same kind of knockout juice they would use on Psycho. And that seemed to work. They wrapped him up in a tarp, passed him over, and all the same, Bulwark is running around with his trench coat. That probably won't come back at all. Probably not. And so, junks take off, and Warbridge is like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take you into the harbor. I'm going to get you in, and I'll get you on a jet out as soon as possible. Chauffeur, can you fly it? And chauffeur's like, boss, I've been awake for the past 48 hours, and I'm kind of drooping here. He's like, all right, I'll get a pilot. It's not a problem. Just get rest, and when you're ready to, it may be necessary that you're going to have to fly a craft. He's like, okay, boss, no problem. So what happens is, rather than go into the harbor on their own power, which is, again, not advisable, harbor authority would certainly report them, there's no way they'd be able to make it back. He calls out a couple of tugboats to push them into the harbor, which now they're salvaged. So this way, and they did the right things, and the right people got paid, and they managed to get the craft into Hong Kong Harbor. Brought them into basically a chop shop for boats. It's a place just ready to take in boats, detail them, fix them, make modifications, send them out. With a whole bunch of people who all of a sudden were stunned to see the group walk out, because there's Muscles. Even though his player wasn't here, he's still there. He's still a reality the group has to deal with. And he is still a 10-foot tall, hugely muscle-bound man. And he walks out, and they're all like, But they are greeted by Warbridge's Hong Kong associate, who puts them into trucks and whisks them away. So they're only going to have a cup of coffee worth of time in Hong Kong before they're flown out again, but they managed to make it. They managed to avoid the forces that were coming after them successfully. So the group should feel pretty good about those successes. And I definitely say there's elements where they are working together as a team better and better to overcome the challenges that are thrown in front of them. All of this bodes well for the future. So, we will take up next time. They will be in Hong Kong. Should be fun. And trying to get back to Foxhaven. So, until next time, I am Rob, and this has been my State of the Dungeon address. Thank you for joining me. Farewell.